The evening air was crisp as Elena Morales drove through the quiet streets of Washington, D.C. The charity gala had run later than expected, but it had been worth every minute. As the wife of FBI Director Robert Morales, she had helped raise over $100,000 for children's education in underprivileged communities. Her mind was still buzzing with conversations and plans for future events when flashing blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Elena pulled over immediately, her hands instinctively moving to the proper 10 and 2 position on the steering wheel. She took a deep breath, wondering what she could have done wrong. Maybe a taillight was out, or perhaps she had been driving a little over the speed limit without realizing it. Either way, she wasn't worried. These things happened. 2 officers approached her car, one on each side. The taller one tapped on her window with his flashlight, his face half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Elena rolled her window down and smiled politely. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," the officer demanded, not bothering to return her greeting. His name tag read, "Officer Johnson." Elena nodded and reached slowly for her purse, making sure her movements were deliberate and clear. "I'm just getting my wallet," she explained, pulling out her driver's license and the car registration from the glove compartment. The officer snatched the documents from her hand, studying them with narrowed eyes. His partner circled around to the passenger side, peering through the window with his hand resting on his holster. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" Officer Johnson asked, his tone shifting as he read her name. "Morales. That's not from around here, is it?" Elena felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air flowing through her open window. "I live just a few miles from here, actually. May I ask why I was pulled over?" The second officer knocked on the passenger window. "Now. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "Excuse me?" Elena asked, confused. "I don't understand what's happening. Could you please tell me what I did wrong?" I said. "Step out of the vehicle," the second officer repeated, his voice rising. "Now." Elena's heart began to race. Something wasn't right about this situation. She thought about her husband, who at this very moment was probably working late at FBI headquarters, completely unaware of what was happening. "I'm sorry, but I believe I have the right to know why I'm being asked to exit my vehicle," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm Elena Morales, and my husband is—" "We don't care who your husband is." "Officer," Johnson cut her off. "Out of the car, now." When Elena hesitated, trying to process the increasingly hostile situation, Officer Johnson abruptly opened her door and reached for her arm. "Wait," Elena protested. "This isn't right. I haven't done anything wrong." But her words fell on deaf ears as Officer Johnson roughly pulled her from the driver's seat. His grip tightened painfully around her wrist as he forced her arms behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her skin. "You're being detained for resisting an officer," he said coldly. "Resisting? But I wasn't. And now you're talking back," his partner added with a smirk. "You people never learn, do you?" Elena stood in shock as they patted her down and searched her car without consent. Nearby traffic slowed as curious drivers watched the scene unfold. A young man in a passing car held up his phone, clearly recording the incident. "My husband is the FBI director," Elena said quietly. "You're making a serious mistake." Officer Johnson laughed. "Sure he is, and I'm the president. Get in the back of the patrol car." As they led her away, Elena caught sight of her reflection in her car window, a respected community leader and charity organizer now being treated like a criminal. All because 2 officers decided her last name and the color of her skin made her suspicious. What should have been a 15-minute drive home had turned into the beginning of a nightmare that would soon shake the foundations of the entire police department. The back seat of the police car smelled like old fast food and something sour that Elena couldn't quite place. She sat with her hands still cuffed behind her, the metal digging into her wrists as the car hit every pothole on the way to the precinct. Each bump sent a jolt of pain through her shoulders. "Please, the handcuffs are too tight," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "They're hurting me." Officer Johnson glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Should have thought about that before resisting. I didn't resist, Elena insisted. The dash cam will show that. I cooperated fully. The two officers exchanged looks and chuckled. Technical difficulties with those cameras happen all the time, the second officer said with a shrug. Such a shame. Elena's stomach dropped. She looked out the window, trying to gather her thoughts as they drove through downtown. People walked past on the sidewalks laughing, heading to dinners or shows, completely unaware of what was happening. Just feet away from them. I have the right to make a phone call, Elena said firmly. I need to call my husband. You'll get your phone call when we process you, Officer Johnson replied dismissively. Rules are rules. When they arrived at the precinct, Elena was led through a side entrance away from the main lobby where civilians might see her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they walked her down a hallway lined with cheap beige paint that was peeling in the corners. A desk officer looked up as they approached, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Elena in handcuffs. What's the charge? He asked, reaching for some paperwork. Resisting an officer and disorderly conduct, Officer Johnson said confidently. She was very aggressive during a routine traffic stop. Elena couldn't believe what she was hearing. That's not true, I didn't do anything wrong. The desk officer glanced at her, then back at Johnson. Any witnesses? Just us, the second officer replied. It was a quiet street. Elena remembered the young man recording with his phone. Someone was filming. There's evidence that I didn't resist. The officers ignored her as they continued with the booking process. Elena's fingerprints were taken, pressing each digit firmly onto an ink pad and then onto the form. A female officer arrived to take her photo, making her stand against a height chart while holding a number. Please, I need to make my phone call, Elena repeated, feeling increasingly desperate as time passed. It had been over an hour since she was pulled over. All in good time, the female officer replied, not unkindly. Processing comes first. Elena was led to a small holding cell with a metal bench attached to the wall. The door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. She sat down, trying to fight the panic rising in her chest. Down the hall, she could hear Officer Johnson on the phone. Yeah, we've got a real piece of work here. Claims her husband is some big shot at the FBI. His laughter cut through the quiet station. We'll let her cool her heels for a while before we bother with any calls. Elena closed her eyes. Robert would be wondering where she was by now. They always texted each other when running late. It was their rule after years of high-stress jobs with unpredictable hours. He'd be checking his phone, maybe getting worried. In another part of the station, a shift supervisor was reviewing the evening's arrests. Who's this Morales woman? He asked, pointing at the booking form. Johnson and Peters brought her in, someone replied. Routine traffic stop gone wrong, apparently. The supervisor frowned. Morales? Why does that name sound familiar? He set the form aside, making a mental note to look into it later when he wasn't swamped with paperwork from 3 other incidents. Meanwhile, Elena sat alone in her cell, watching the clock on the wall. 2 hours had passed since her arrest. No phone call, no explanation, no rights read to her. Just the growing certainty that she was being treated differently because of who she was, or rather, who these officers thought she was, based on nothing more than her last name and appearance. What she didn't know was that across town, her husband was about to discover her absence, and the quiet police station was about to become the center of a storm. Robert Morales checked his watch for the 3rd time in 15 minutes. The security briefing was dragging on, but his mind was elsewhere. Elena should have been home by now. She always texted when she was running late. Always. He'd sent her 4 messages in the past hour, each one unanswered. Director Morales, the analyst at the front of the room, paused her presentation. Did you have a question about the operation in Detroit? Robert blinked, bringing himself back to the briefing room filled with senior FBI officials. No, please. Continue. I apologize for the distraction. As the analyst resumed her slideshow about a major drug trafficking case, Robert discreetly checked his phone again. Nothing from Elena. This wasn't like her at all. His assistant Tom leaned over. Everything okay, sir? He whispered. Elena's not responding to my texts, Robert replied quietly. She should have been home from the charity event hours ago. Tom nodded, understanding the concern. In their line of work, unexplained absences were taken seriously. Want me to make some calls? Robert hesitated, then nodded slightly. Tom slipped out of the room while the briefing continued. 10 minutes later, Tom returned with a worried expression. He passed Robert a note. 3 missed calls from unknown number to your personal cell. Left voicemail 45 minutes ago. Robert excused himself from the meeting and stepped into the hallway, pressing his phone against his ear to listen to the message. This message is for Mr. Morales. This is Officer Reynolds from the 7th Precinct. We have a woman in custody who claims to be related to you. Please call back at this number for verification. The blood drained from Robert's face. Elena was in police custody? It had to be some kind of mistake. He immediately called the number, back identifying himself as FBI Director Morales. Oh, the officer on the other end sounded surprised. Yes, sir. We do have an Elena Morales here. She was brought in about 2 hours ago on charges of resisting an officer during a traffic stop. That's impossible, Robert said, his voice deadly calm despite the anger building inside him. My wife wouldn't resist an officer. Where is she now? She's in a holding cell waiting to be processed, sir. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't move her, don't do anything until I arrive, is that understood? Yes, sir, the officer replied, sounding considerably less confident. Robert ended the call and turned to Tom, who had been waiting nearby. I need you to call Agent Chen and Agent Washington. Tell them to meet me at the 7th Precinct immediately. Then I need you to find out everything you can about who arrested my wife and why. Tom nodded, already dialing his phone. Do you want me to call the commissioner? Robert shook his head. Not yet. I want to assess the situation first. He took the elevator down to the parking garage where his driver was waiting. 7th Precinct, fast as you can, he instructed, sliding into the back seat. During the drive, Robert's mind raced through possibilities. Elena was one of the most law-abiding people he knew. Something was very wrong about this situation. His phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Officers Johnson and Peters made the arrest. Both have 3 prior complaints for excessive force. Johnson has 1 complaint specifically about racial profiling that was dismissed. Robert's jaw tightened. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture he'd seen too many times before, just never with his own family. When the car pulled up outside the precinct, Agents Chen and Washington were already waiting. Both were dressed in suits despite the late hour, their FBI badges visible. Sir, Agent Chen greeted him. We've notified the desk that you're arriving. They seemed nervous. Good, Robert said grimly. They should be. As they walked into the precinct, conversations stopped. Officers looked up from their desks, recognizing the FBI director immediately. Some looked confused, others looked worried. Robert approached the front desk, his voice level but intense. I'm here for my wife, Elena Morales. Where is she? The desk sergeant jumped to his feet. Director Morales, yes sir, I'll take you to her right away. And, Robert added, I want Officers Johnson and Peters in the captain's office in 5 minutes. We need to have a conversation about what happened, tonight. As they walked through the station toward the holding cells, Robert felt every eye on him. He didn't care. All that mattered now was getting to Elena and making sure she was all right. What none of them realized was that this night would change everything, not just for the Morales family, but for the entire police department and beyond. The holding. Cell door swung open with a metallic screech. Elena looked up to see a young officer standing nervously in the doorway. Mrs. Morales, you can come with me now, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Elena stood up slowly, her legs stiff from sitting on the hard bench for hours. Am I being released? Can I make my phone call now? Your husband is here, the officer replied, not meeting her eyes. Elena's relief was instant but short-lived. As she followed the officer down the corridor, She saw Officer Johnson and his partner huddled with a third officer, speaking in urgent whispers that stopped abruptly when they noticed. The young officer led her to a small conference room rather than the main lobby. When the door opened, Elena finally felt like she could breathe again. Robert stood there, his face a mask of controlled anger. The moment he saw her, his expression softened. "Elena," he said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. He took her hands in his, examining the red marks where the handcuffs had been too tight. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "Just shaken up. They wouldn't let me call you." Robert's jaw tightened. He turned to the precinct captain who had been hovering uncertainly by the door. "Captain Rivera, I'd like to see the officers who arrested my wife. Now." The captain nodded, quickly. "They're waiting next door, sir." Robert turned to Agents Chen and Washington. "Stay with my wife. I'll handle this." The conference room next door had a large table with Officers Johnson and Peters seated on one side, looking uncomfortable, but defiant. Their body language changed the moment Robert entered, backs straightening, eyes darting between him and the captain. "Gentlemen," Robert said, his voice deceptively calm as he sat across from them, "I'd like to hear exactly why you arrested my wife tonight." Officer Johnson cleared his throat. "Sir, we pulled over a vehicle for running a stop sign. The driver became combative." "Combative?" Robert interrupted. "That doesn't sound like my wife." "With all due respect, sir," Officer Peters jumped in, "people act differently when they're pulled over. She refused to follow our instructions and claimed to be married to someone important at the FBI." Robert nodded slowly. "I see. And did you check her ID? Did you verify her claim?" The officers exchanged glances. "We were going to, but her attitude, Robert repeated flatly. "Captain, I'd like to see the dashcam footage." A heavy silence fell over the room. Captain Rivera shifted uncomfortably. "There may be a technical issue with the footage, sir." "A technical issue," Robert echoed. "How convenient." He leaned forward. "Let me be clear. My wife was driving home from a charity event where she was photographed with the mayor and several city council members. She has never had so much as a parking ticket. Yet somehow she ends up in handcuffs, denied her phone call, and placed in a holding cell for over 3 hours. Officer Johnson's face flushed. "Sir, we were just doing our job. She fit a profile." He stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. "A profile?" Robert's voice was dangerously quiet now. "What exactly does that mean, Officer Johnson?" Before Johnson could respond, the door opened and a flustered administrative assistant entered. "Captain, you need to see this. It's all over social media." She handed the captain a tablet. On the screen was a video titled, "Cops Racially Profile and Arrest Woman Who Claims to be FBI Director's Wife." It already had thousands of views and was climbing rapidly. The captain's face drained of color as he watched. The video, shot by a passing driver, clearly showed Elena cooperating while Officer Johnson roughly pulled her from the car. Her voice could be heard saying, "My husband is the FBI director," followed by Johnson's dismissive laugh. "Well," Robert said as the video ended, "it seems we do have footage after all." He stood up. "Captain, I expect my wife's immediate release with all charges dropped. As for these officers, I suggest you place them on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Officer Johnson stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is bull. Sit down," Captain Rivera barked. "You've done enough damage tonight." Robert walked to the door, then turned back. "Oh, and one more thing, my wife deserves an apology." The 2 officers stared at him, neither speaking. "No apology?" Robert nodded, as if confirming something to why himself. "That's what I thought, Captain. We'll be in touch tomorrow. My office will want every piece of evidence related to this incident. Nothing gets deleted, nothing disappears. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Director Morales," the captain replied. As Robert left the room, he knew this was just the beginning. The video was out there now, and by morning the whole country would be watching. The sun had barely risen when Elena's phone started ringing non-stop. News vans lined their street, reporters standing with microphones ready. all hoping to catch the first interview with the FBI director's wife, who had been wrongfully arrested. "It's crazy out there," Robert said, peeking through the curtains of their living room. "I've arranged for additional security. We don't have to talk to any of them if you don't want to." Elena sat on the couch, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She hadn't slept much. The video of her arrest had spread like wildfire overnight, already viewed millions of times. Major news networks were running it on repeat, with headlines like, "Racial profiling scandal, FBI director's wife targeted." "I think I should speak out," Elena said quietly. "This isn't just about me. This happens to people every day who don't have the platform I do." Robert sat beside her, taking her hand. "Are you sure? Once you step into this, there's no stepping back." Elena nodded. "I'm sure." By noon, Elena sat across from a respected news anchor in their living room, cameras rolling. She recounted the events calmly, her voice steady even as she described the officer's treatment. "They didn't see me as a person," she explained. "They saw my last name, my appearance, and made assumptions. What scares me most is thinking about all the people this happens to who don't have a high-profile husband or a viral video to bring attention to their case." Across town, at the police precinct, Captain Rivera was addressing a room packed with reporters. "We take these allegations extremely seriously," he stated. "Both officers have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The department apologizes to Mrs. Morales for her treatment and the clear violation of our protocols." A reporter raised her hand. "Has either officer expressed remorse or apologized directly to Mrs. Morales?" The captain hesitated. "Not at this time." Outside the precinct, protesters gathered, their signs demanding justice and police reform. What had started as a single incident was quickly becoming a symbol of a larger problem. Meanwhile, officers, Johnson and Peters, held their own impromptu press conference at their union headquarters. "We were doing our job," Officer Johnson insisted, looking directly into the cameras. "The area had seen several vehicles matching that description involved in drug trafficking. We had reasonable suspicion to investigate." "So you're saying you did nothing wrong?" a reporter pressed. "I'm saying we followed procedure," Johnson replied stubbornly. "This is being blown out of proportion because of who her husband is." Back at the Morales home, Robert's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Johnson and Peters are on TV doubling down." Robert showed Elena the clip of the officer's statement playing on another news channel. "They're digging themselves deeper," he said, shaking his head. Elena watched the officers, noting their defensive posture and unwavering certainty. They really believe they did nothing wrong. By evening, the story had gone national. Political figures weighed in, civil rights leaders called for accountability, and social media exploded with similar stories from people across the country. The police department's social media accounts were flooded with comments. Their official apology post received thousands of angry responses, many pointing out that it wasn't enough without the officers themselves acknowledging wrongdoing. As night fell, Elena and Robert sat in their kitchen, watching the coverage continue on a small TV. "The chief of police called," Robert said. "He wants to meet with us tomorrow, the mayor too." Elena nodded tiredly. "What do you think will happen to those officers?" "That depends on how the investigation goes," Robert replied. "But with the video evidence and their refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, they're not making it easy on themselves." A notification popped up on Elena's phone. Someone had created an online petition demanding the officer's termination. It already had over 50,000 signatures. "This is bigger than just us now," Elena said, looking at the growing numbers. "People are really angry." Robert put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay with that? Being at the center of this storm?" Elena took a deep breath, thinking of all the people who had reached out to share similar experiences, people who had never received justice or even acknowledgement. "Yes," she said firmly. "Someone needs to stand up. Might as well be us." Neither of them could have predicted how much bigger the storm would grow, or how stubbornly those two officers would continue to refuse any responsibility for what they had done. The Internal Affairs Office was busier than anyone could remember. Detective Lee Wong had been assigned as lead investigator on the Morales case, and his desk was buried under files, witness statements, and media reports. "You look like you haven't slept," his colleague remarked, placing a coffee on his desk. "Thanks," Wong said, taking a grateful sip. "This case is a powder keg. The commissioner's breathing down my neck for results, but I need to be thorough." On his computer screen, Wong reviewed the video footage for what felt like the 100th time. The bystander's viral video had been joined by security camera footage from a nearby business that captured the entire incident from a different angle. He could clearly see Elena Morales following all instructions until Officer Johnson abruptly escalated the situation. Wong pulled up the officer's personnel files. Johnson had 3 previous complaints of excessive force and 1 specifically mentioning racial bias. All had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Peters had 2 similar complaints, both dismissed. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Detective Wong? An assistant poked her head in. The FBI data team just sent over their analysis of the precinct's arrest records for the past 3 years. The data was damning. Both officers had arrested Hispanic and Black drivers at rates significantly higher than their colleagues patrolling the same areas. The racial disparity couldn't be explained by any legitimate policing factors. Across town, inside the police union's headquarters, Officers Johnson and Peters sat with their union representative and a lawyer. "The evidence doesn't look good," the lawyer admitted bluntly. "The video contradicts your written report on several key points." "So what?" Johnson said, crossing his arms. "We had reasonable suspicion." "Based on what?" the lawyer pressed. "Her last name? You can't just say profile and expect that to fly as probable cause." Peters shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Look, we made a judgment call." "A bad one," the union rep interjected. "And doubling down with that press conference only made things worse," the lawyer nodded. "The department is willing to offer a deal. If you both issue public apologies, complete sensitivity training, and accept 2-week suspensions without pay, they'll close the investigation." "Apologize?" Johnson scoffed. "For doing our jobs? No way." "You need to think about this," the union rep warned. "If the investigation concludes with a recommendation for termination, we can't guarantee we'll back you all the way." "We didn't do anything wrong," Johnson insisted, his face reddening. "We're not apologizing for following procedure." Meanwhile, at the Justice Department, a team was reviewing the case file. The evidence suggested potential civil rights violations that went beyond departmental policy breaches. This could justify federal charges, one analyst noted, highlighting sections of the report. "Let's wait for the internal affairs investigation to conclude," her supervisor cautioned. "But yes, put together a preliminary case. The director has taken a personal interest in this one." Back at the precinct, Captain Rivera was studying the mounting evidence with a growing sense of dread. The department's reputation was taking a massive hit. Online, under Justice for Elena was trending nationwide. Civil rights organizations were calling for sweeping reforms, and at the center of it all were 2 officers who refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. "They've been offered every opportunity to make this right," Rivera told his deputy. "A simple apology would go a long way." "Johnson's always been stubborn," the deputy replied. "He thinks admitting fault is a sign of weakness." "It's going to cost him his badge," Rivera said grimly. "Maybe more." As Detective Wong compiled his final report, the evidence was overwhelming. The traffic stop had been unwarranted. The escalation had been completely unjustified. The denial of Elena's rights had been deliberate, and the racial profiling element was undeniable. Wong submitted his report with a clear recommendation: immediate termination of both officers and referral to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. "You sure about this?" his supervisor asked, skimming the report. "This is going to make waves." Wong nodded firmly. "The evidence speaks for itself. And frankly, their refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing makes them dangerous to keep on the force." The report landed on the commissioner's desk by evening. After reading it thoroughly, he made 2 calls, one to the mayor and one to the Morales family. The decision had been made. But no one could have predicted how Officers Johnson and Peters would react when faced with the consequences of their actions. The courtroom was packed to capacity. Journalists filled the back rows, their pens poised over notepads. The air felt heavy with anticipation as Officers Johnson and Peters sat stiffly at the defendant's table, their attorney whispering urgently between them. Elena and Robert Morales entered quietly through a side door, taking seats near the front. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of investigations, hearings, and media appearances. Elena looked tired, but determined, squeezing Robert's hand as the judge entered the room. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Patel, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, surveyed the crowded courtroom before speaking. "Today we're here for the sentencing phase in the case of the state versus Johnson and Peters. The officers had been found guilty the previous week on charges of false imprisonment, filing false reports, and civil rights violations. Now they faced their punishment. Before I announce my decision," Judge Patel continued, "I'll give the defendants one final opportunity to address the court." The officer's attorney stood first. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that they were following department protocols based on their training and experience. We ask the court for leniency, considering their years of service." The judge nodded, then looked directly at the officers. "Do either of you wish to speak on your own behalf?" Officer Johnson stood, his posture rigid. "Your Honor, I've served this city for 12 years. I've put my life on the line every day. That night I made a judgment call based on suspicious behavior in a high-crime area. I stand by that decision." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Even now, facing jail time, he refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. Officer Peters rose next, looking less certain. "Your Honor, He glanced at Johnson, then back at the judge. "I followed my partner's lead that night. I stand by our actions." Judge Patel's expression remained unchanged. "Very well." She took a moment to review her notes before speaking again. "Throughout this trial, I've seen overwhelming evidence of racial profiling, excessive force, and deliberate rights violations. What troubles me most is the complete lack of remorse or acknowledgement from either defendant." She looked up, addressing the officers directly. "You were offered multiple opportunities to apologize and accept responsibility. A simple 'I'm sorry' might have changed the course of these proceedings. Instead, you chose defiance in the face of clear evidence of your misconduct." The courtroom fell silent as she continued. "The job of a police officer carries enormous power and responsibility. When that power is abused, it damages not just the immediate victim, but public trust in the entire system of justice." Elena sat perfectly still, her eyes never leaving the judge. "I hereby sentence each defendant to 18 months in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 months. The judge's gavel came down with finality. The officers' faces showed shock as reality hit them. Their attorney immediately began discussing appeal options as they were led away by court officers. Outside the courthouse, Elena faced a wall of reporters and cameras. Robert stood protectively at her side as she stepped up to the microphones. "Today isn't about celebration," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It's about accountability. No one is above the law, especially those entrusted to enforce it." A reporter called out, "What's next for you, Mrs. Morales?" Elena shared a look with Robert before answering. "We're establishing the Morales Foundation for Police Accountability and Reform. This experience has shown us how much work still needs to be done." Later that evening, in the quiet of their home, Elena and Robert watched the news coverage together. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did wrong?" Elena wondered aloud. Robert shook his head. "Some people can't admit mistakes, even when the evidence is overwhelming. But that doesn't make what you did any less important." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about all the people who go through similar experiences without the resources or platform we have. Their stories don't end with justice in a courtroom." "That's why the foundation matters," Robert said. "This case has already changed department policies across 3 states. Training programs are being revised. Complaint review processes are being strengthened." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. It shouldn't take someone married to the FBI director to get justice. No, Robert agreed quietly. It shouldn't. 1 year later, as Officer Johnson was released on parole, reporters asked if he had any regrets. He walked past them without comment, still unwilling to acknowledge any wrongdoing. But the world around him had changed. The Morales Foundation had helped implement body camera requirements for officers in 50 police departments nationwide. Complaint review boards now included civilian members, and Elena Morales had become a powerful voice for reform, turning a single wrongful arrest into a movement for accountability and change.